Good evening. You'd have to go back over 100 years to find a comparison. Americans wrestling with the stillness, a year hunkered indoors for what has seemed an eternity. Far and away the most social era in human history, social gatherings, social networking, social clubs, school socials, and perhaps the largest social of them all, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat. You can find hundreds of social media apps or distractions on our devices. Yet, when left to our own devices, we discover a yearning for the one thing we can't have, togetherness. For some, the harboring away has been uniquely familiar, even comforting. They'd never admit it and rarely share the seduction of solitude over companionship. For many of those 1 in 5 Americans who will face a mental health episode this year, the quietness calls. For Will Collins, a man you're about to meet, a man diagnosed with depression, the still of the night began taking over one spring in 2017. Season 2 of Cascade Community Foundation's Q&A live stream series begins tonight with part 1 of Isolated, a mental health discussion. An often avoided topic, mental health, headlines the culmination of endless inquiry of you, the public. Sharing with us what is needed most has taken us on a journey with the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan. A renowned solution unpacked by their executive director, Christy Buck, their Be Nice action plan rolled out for our viewers so that you can walk away with a plan of your own. If you're the 1 in 5, or you know someone facing this very real and far too avoided topic, this episode may change your life. And now, with part 1 of Isolated, Casey Jones.
Welcome to Cascade Community Foundation's Q&A live stream series. I'm Casey Jones, the morning anchor at WoodTV. Today, a conversation that unravels far too often in the news every day: mental health. Whether you're one of the 1 in 5 who may struggle with a mental health episode this year, a loved one searching for answers, or perhaps you stumbled on this topic or that battle, today's conversation will be impactful. It's one that's a rarity in our culture. A survival story about a man who was pushed to the brink in his own mind and a friend unwilling to give up on him. So often these stories go untold, whether that's stigma or shame or because the act of suicide is completed. We know the numbers, they're alarming, that women are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide, but men are far more likely to die by the act. Those numbers, the statistics, we know them because of the stories that are told. What's even more scary and alarming are the stories that go untold, the numbers we don't know because of the individuals who fight every single day silently, like our guest today, Will Collins. Will fought silently and alone for years. It's a battle that he almost lost and almost took his life. But today, Will, for the first time, is sharing his story publicly, hoping to empower and impact others with a conversation that will take us from the inner city streets of Detroit to Grand Valley and Allendale, to Amway here in Ada. We'll reach rock bottom with a note to his children that everything would be okay, and a phone call to a friend that he says would save his life. And hopefully by the end of it, we'll equip you with the power, the tools, and the resources to recognize and notice those changes in others or yourself so that you can make a difference and possibly save a life. Will Collins, thank you so much for joining us. Will, I know that you're a private man. You've said that. So today we want to thank you for the opportunity to share your story and impact others. And I want to start in 2017. You know, that's 4 years ago, and here we are in 2021, just now talking about it. I want to start with your darkest day. Where were you mentally on that day, and how far had you come in the decision that life was no longer worth living?
It was by far my darkest day. I'd reached a point where I had come to the conclusion nobody believed me. You tell your story, you defend your character, and nobody believed me. And at that point, you start to think, you can be uneducated and survive. You can be unemployed and survive. But when you feel like you've lost hope, why not give up? And that was the point I had reached. I felt like, my gosh, I know who I am. I never questioned the character of who I am as a person. I'm loyal to a fault, and nobody believes me. And I was going through a divorce, and I have a brother who's been through a lot, and I was dealing with a lot of heavy stuff with him as well. And as you put that all together, at a certain point, it just felt like too much. And it felt like, you know what, for once in my life, I'm gonna take the easy way out. And that was this decision I made, and the plan I had built was to take the easy way out.
Which would have been to take your own life?
That was the ultimate goal. April, May of 2017. Yes.
We'll get back to that.
Okay.
I want to learn more about you.
Okay.
Because taking the easy way out is not something that you've been accustomed to. You grew up in inner city Detroit. As you put it, the east side of Detroit. If it were a war zone like Afghanistan, you said your neighborhood was Beirut.
Yes.
How hard was life growing up?
Man, there's some days I don't even like to go back to my childhood because it was that hard. Growing up with a single mom who was in and out, busy doing her own thing, but it came down to me and my brother, and we became so close. And that bond is what really got me through the tough times in Detroit. But how tough was it? It's hard to watch people suffer. It's hard to watch people lose faith and hope in themselves and the potential of doing something great in life. It was the toughest thing to go through, knowing that most people, and myself included, didn't feel like there was a way out. So it was hard, because how can you be excited about life when you don't feel like there's a path to something great? You just feel like you're spinning your wheels trying to survive on a daily basis and not looking forward to something that's great at that end of that road. So it's tough.
What kind of trauma did you experience then as a kid that maybe shaped you or built you into who you are today?
Yeah. I grew up raised by a single mom. And this is something that's very relevant and common in the inner city. Single mom, 2 brothers, 2 sisters. And what really shaped me, what trauma did I see? I have an older brother, and my older brother got shot in the back. And just imagine a young kid, 18, running into a supermarket to the back room and seeing your brother sitting in a chair with a hole 6 inches from his heart. And not wondering, and then you begin to wonder, is he gonna make it? Right? Is this what I'm destined for? Because my brother is 2 years older than me. And so that was one of the most traumatic and one of the things I still remember in my life to this day, is running in there and seeing that and starting to wonder, am I going to be the next one in my family shot? I have a little brother. The next traumatic thing, I have a little brother. He went down the wrong path also, and ended up in a car and going to do something that he probably regrets doing, but long story short, some people jumped out of the bushes and shot the entire car up. They killed the driver, front passenger's paralyzed, my little brother's got a bullet in the back of his head for the rest of his life. It's those 2 instances, I'll just say, is when I started to look at myself and say, I know which way they went. I'm gonna go that way. I don't know what's over there, but I know what's over here, and I'm gonna take that chance and go this way. I'm the nerd in the family, self-proclaimed nerd, gladly. So I celebrate being a nerd. But I also know that had I went that same direction my 2 brothers went, I'd probably be in a similar situation as them.
So then how? How did you go that way? What was different for you? How did you make your way to Grand Valley in the 80s? I loved school. I just loved the thought of studying, preparing for tests, I like that research piece of always being prepared. So I was a really good student. And someone saw something in me in 10th grade, because I was a good student, but I was also scared to go to school, because the violence at my school at the time, you didn't know on a daily basis if you're gonna get jumped, if you're gonna get shot, if you're gonna make it home. So someone saw something in me, and they offered me an opportunity to go to a private school for 2 years, to get my grades up
and get myself ready to potentially go to college. And as a young African-American man, that was the hardest decision, to uproot and go to the suburbs and go to a predominantly white school. It was the hardest decision ever, because it takes you out of your comfort zone, but I knew that that's something I needed to do. Just for an opportunity potentially to be successful, I had to make that decision. So I went to a private school for 2 years, and I worked really hard to get my grades up, and by the grace of God, Grand Valley accepted me. I struggled my first 2 years coming from the inner city to a cornfield. It was a culture shock. And there are times I said to myself, I gotta go back home. But going home wasn't an option, because while I'm at Grand Valley, many of my friends were shot and killed. So going home, I was going back to a lifestyle that didn't fit me. So I stayed, and I worked hard, and I graduated from Grand Valley with a degree in advertising and public relations, and I'm appreciative every day of not going home, right? So that's my journey from Detroit to Grand Valley, and from that I worked at a temporary service company for 3 years. One of our main clients was Amway. I never heard of Amway. I didn't know a thing about it. I learned about it, and an opening came. I applied for it. I got the job there in July of '97, and been there ever since.
Who was the proudest of you when you made it out of Detroit and you graduated from Grand Valley?
Wow. I would say my grandmother first. My grandmother was my hero. I've got 2 heroes in my life. A little short, 4'11" older lady who I was terrified of growing up, and Martin Luther King Jr. And so my grandmother, before she passed away my junior year, she developed Alzheimer's. And even through Alzheimer's, she still was excited when I came home from college. So I always looked forward to coming home. She may call me my brother's name sometime, and I didn't care. I knew she was excited to see me. So she was so inspirational, and she didn't even know it, of helping me survive and work hard, because she had a work ethic that really inspired me to work hard. My greatest, probably people who rooted me on the most, was my small, closest friends. I don't have a big friendship circle by choice, but the people who were closest to me in the city, they knew what I was doing, and they celebrated. And probably the other person, he'll never admit it because he's very prideful, is my older brother. To this day, we still stay in contact, but he always stayed in touch with me in his own unique way. But he always asked me how I'm doing, asked me different questions about my progression through life, and I appreciated him in his busy life, always taking the time to just check in and find out how I'm doing. So I would say that's probably the circle of small people who I think were my biggest cheerleaders.
So you get to Amway, you've got your degree, you've graduated the cornfield. Here you are in Ada, and by all accounts, you know, you're living the American dream. Fast forward 23 years, yeah. You've been there. What was going on behind the scenes in the reality of that dream that people didn't see?
Growing up, you're programmed in the inner city. You don't show emotion. You don't cry. Those are signs of weakness, so you don't do it. And so I held in lots of pain, lots of hurt, till I was 47 years old. And you don't realize you're struggling with this pain and hurt, because all you know is you're doing exactly what you've been told to do and what you've been really raised to do, and that is suppress. You don't talk about private stuff. You don't put stuff out on the street. You simply hold it in. So 47 years of pent in pain, because I've seen it all. I've been through it all. I don't wish my childhood on anybody, because you had to grow up way too fast. And I'll say I never really had a chance to enjoy childhood, because it was just me and my brother. My mother would leave for long periods of time, and it was just me and my brother, just trying to survive. In the summer, we carried groceries for money, and in the winter, we went out in tennis shoes and shoveled snow for money. So it's a path that I look and say I celebrate it for this reason. It was hard, and it taught me hard work, and it taught me never to quit and never to give up. and push through tough times. So I have no regrets from where I've come from.
You say you didn't grow up with a childhood, and it was important to you to give your kids that childhood that you didn't have. Michaela and Quentin.
Yeah.
Who are they for you?
Ooh, man. See, I was hoping you'd bring up a subject that really put a smile on my face, and I didn't have a dad. So dad one-on-one was learning on the job, you know? And man, did I make a lot of mistakes, man. But my two kids are my world, man. My son is 21, and my daughter is 19, and they're both students at Western Michigan University. And we're still close, if not closer than we were as they were growing up. I decided when my kids were growing up, I'm gonna be the dad I didn't have, and I'm gonna create the memories with my kids that every kid around them have the opportunity to create. So my kids have done plenty of things that they can look at and say they did it with their dad and their mom, but I'm being selfish right now. They did it with their dad, and they can keep those memories in their head forever. So that's probably the reason that I worked harder and didn't give up and didn't execute my plan. Because if I would have executed my plan, then they would have been just like me, left without a father to build memories with.
How did you're diagnosed with depression? How did that begin to manifest itself in your actions, where you recognized, I can't do this alone anymore?
Yeah.
I need help.
Yeah. The hardest part when you're down is being alone. This gentleman taught me that. One phone call, he told me that, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. He told me, be out doing things with people. And when you're down, the last thing you want to do is be out with people. You want to be by yourself. And Jim told me that, and I'll never forget. I was standing in front of my house in one of my darkest moments, and I was on the phone with him, and he said, you need to be around people. And I fought, and I beat myself up like, no, I don't want to be around people. I got around people. So how did it manifest? Being alone and just being caught up in your own sorrow, having a pity party, but also going through bad things, going bad things, and it just, all of those things stacked up. And all you can do is think about them. All you can do is be frustrated that you feel like you know you're right, but no one believes you. You know you're not what people say about you, but no one believes you. And that was probably where it's really started to really boil up. It's like, man, I know my character. I was raised by my grandmother. She taught me to always be a gentleman. She taught me to never lie. She taught me to stand for something. So I know who I am. But when people question those things, it really starts to break you down. And as you're getting broke down, you find all these emotions coming out that you suppressed for years. So now you got these new things happening to you. You combine it with old, and you don't have anyone really to talk to because you feel like you're on an island. So for me, I said after talking to Jim and understanding that you gotta stay in the fight. He gave me a 1-800 number, and secretly, I never told anybody but him. I used it a couple times, just because I wanted to talk to somebody and not to have them know who I am and not judge me. That's all I needed. And that was really, from the manifestation to starting that journey of, I can do this, right? I got in touch with a really good therapist I started seeing. I went and checked myself into a day program at Pine Rest for a while. And I started my fight, man, and it was hard. I've played a lot of sports, man. I've got a lot of fights, and nothing's been a bigger fight and harder than sitting in your car after a session for 15 minutes and not moving. Because you're trying to recalibrate. You're trying to get to that point where you can start your car and drive home. But that was my manifestation, and that was how I started it and how I've gradually gotten through it. But like Jim's told me, it's every day. It's not something you don't fix it overnight. And I remember those words too. This is a journey now. And so I'm constantly on my journey.
And that friend unwilling to give up on Will is Jim Ayers, the former president of Amway North America. Jim, Will talks a lot about this open door policy that you had. Did you ever think, a lot of bosses have that open door policy. Come on in and talk to me. I'm a nice guy. Did you ever think that leaving your door open would save someone's life? Never occurred to me. In fact, if I could, I'd like to ask Will a question of what made you, because one day I was in my office doing some work, and he just came into my office. He stuck his head in the door and said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I knew Will, and I tried to make it a policy. I mean, you can't just have an open door. You got to make an effort to be open, connect to people, and build in people, especially when you have a title and that kind of stuff. They got to feel safe, right? And that doesn't happen overnight. So, I'm pleased that people were doing that, but I never expected this. And one day he just walked into my office and said, "Can we talk?" He started talking to me about depression and how he was feeling, having no idea that I had a background in mental health, and I got a personal story with that. But why did you stick your head and decide that you wanted to talk to me that day?
When Jim got announced as our new managing director, I'll never forget he was on stage in our headquarters, and he started talking. And, and I'm listening. And I'm like, I like what this guy's saying. And it was something about the passion he had and the things he was saying, where we were going with our company and our affiliate, that I thought, man, I want to be a part of that. And I remember seeing him in the hallway one day, and I said, "I don't know where you're taking us, but I'm going to go with you. I trust what you're saying, and I'm going to ride with you." And that was for me, trust is everything. I can get through anything in life if I trust someone. And my level of trust for Jim grew immediately. And as I was starting to go through stuff, I just started to think, who can I just talk to? Who won't judge me? Who won't tell my business to somebody else? And I worked close to Jim in proximity in the building, and I just said to myself, I know Jim. He's a good dude. I'm gonna take a flyer here, and I'm gonna go in and talk to Jim and just see what he says. He may tell me, to get out of his office. That's the risk that was the risk I was willing to take. So I just said to myself, I'm gonna walk in. I'm gonna ask him for a few minutes, and I'm gonna sit down, and it was life-changing.
So, Casey, the lesson for me there is, and at Mental Health Foundation, we talk about be nice, notice, invite, challenge, empower, but kind of if you translate that, the first step is being available, noticing, right? And so I remember that day, like it was yesterday, Will came in and started talking to me, and I just said everything I was down, I put it down. And I'm like, I'm here, I don't care if this takes an hour, I'm gonna talk to this person. And we had a first conversation that day, and that really started a series of conversations where we continued to bond. I do want to, say that we really connected in a lot of ways. In fact, as I hear Will's story again, I had so much the same experience. Definitely not to the extent that he's had it. He's a miracle of nature for what he has survived and how he's prospered. But I lost my dad when I was 9 unexpectedly, lost our home, ended up in the inner city of Kalamazoo, totally unaware of what it was about. It was a very violent experience. I was afraid to go to school every day. And I think what turned me around was my mom. I don't know how she did it. She saved up a lot of money. I guess she sent me to a private school for 1 year for 6th grade. And that opened up a whole new world for me, and it turned me around. So a lot of similarities there. But, I knew immediately from my experience, and I have personal experience with mental health issues in my family. One of my children has struggled with depression and bipolar for their whole life. And, there's raising a child that's struggling with that is a difficult thing. And it was a learning process for me. I didn't really understand it until, my child was probably, in maybe 5th or 6th grade or something, and I started understanding it. It started very early. I'll never forget some of the lessons I learned from that. Probably the biggest one that I got was, I'll never forget, talking to my child and being told that they are thinking about taking their life. And it's hard for me to talk about. And of course, as a dad, my job is to fix it. So I'm like, what's wrong? Tell me what's wrong. Nothing's wrong. And then it dawned on me, I learned through that process that it's not like one single thing that you can just flip a switch and do something as a parent and fix it all. It doesn't work that way. And in fact, I came to understand that people that are thinking of taking their own lives, of course, they're not thinking rationally. They've lost hope. And almost always they really kind of feel like they're kind of doing everybody a favor. They're going to be better off without me, right? I realized that's where my child was. And so I had all that background inside of me that I lived for so many years. I will say now my child, I'm so proud of them. Now is in their 30s, family, and guess what my child does for a living? On the other end of that 800 number now.
Wow.
Suicide hotline. Wow. Which just, I couldn't be prouder. But, so when Will walked in that day and started talking to me, it resonated with me. We just started talking, and I think I told you some of my experience as well, right? And kind of some of the things I've gone through, with my family. And I was just so happy he talked to me. I think I did a couple of things, I think, in the first conversation or so, if I'm remembering it right. But one was to try to convince you to get help and to give at least one reference to check into, which I think that Will eventually did, which I was really happy about. And then I think just encouraging, let's keep talking, right?
Yep.
And the conversation.
Yep.
I don't know, it just kind of went from there. It was one of the, I think back on it now that this whole relationship and everything is one of the most important things in my life, really, when I think about it. I never expected it. And I think if I can just continue on that, if I fast forward to that day that he called me, I was it was out of the blue. I was in Scotland for work. I was having lunch with my wife at a golf course in Scotland, and my phone rang, and it was a doctor who was working with Will and asked me if I'd be willing to talk to him because he was in a bad way. I said sure. So a few minutes later, Will called me, and I went outside, and gosh, we might have talked for an hour that day, I think. And I could tell that he was in a really, really bad place. It reminded me of conversations I had with my child. A really, really deep, dark, dangerous place. I'll relate how I feel because people have to understand if they're ever confronted with this with their child or a friend or anybody, I want to relate what I went through. I'll tell you what, I was scared. I was like, whoa, I'm not qualified to do this. I'm not trained to do this. I relied on my experience, and I trusted my instincts. Number one, I listened. I just listened. I asked a lot about what was he thinking? What was he feeling? What's going on? How you feeling right now? I did, from my experience, give him some suggestions, and he mentions be around people. If I recall correctly, I think I asked him, how long have you been in your house? And I think he might have said a couple of days or something like that. And I said, I want you to do a very simple thing, but you got to promise me you're going to do it. When we hang up this phone, I want you to open the door, walk outside, and walk around the block. Just walk around the block. That's therapy, man. I mean, movement. Get up and move. Get out. Start interacting, right? That sounds like such a meaningless little thing, but you would want to probably relate to that. But for me, those little things get you living again, get you moving again. So we talked about that, and I know that. And again, I was careful about it because I know from experience you can't rationalize somebody out of that place that they're in, because they're not thinking rationally anyways. But we did talk. I asked him about his kids. I got him talking about his kids. I got him thinking about his kids. And I might have, I can't remember for sure, I may even have related my experience when I lost my dad, how it affected my life and what I went through, the trauma of, well, it's always with me, but I probably really didn't get over it until I was in my 30s. And so, kind of use my example and my story and try to get across to him that your kids need you, man. You got to be there for them. And I think lastly, the last thing I'll mention that I know I said to him that day, and I've said it to him often, but I certainly said it that day, is simple words. I believe in you. Mm-hmm. I believe in you, man. And the other thing I know I talked to him about, because we've talked about it several times, knowing Will's story, knowing what he's overcome, knowing how he had mentors and he had people that helped him, but he pulled himself up by the bootstraps. He pulled himself out of that situation, and he made himself what he is today. Mm-hmm. So I reminded him that day, I know I did, you got the heart of a champion beaten in your chest. Don't you ever forget that. And those are the things I remember talking to Will about that day. And I was concerned. I thought he sounded better when we hung up, but I was concerned, and I'm glad that it helps him.
The phrase that really I still hear it to this day is "I believe in you." When you're going through a crisis in your life and you feel like everybody don't believe you, to hear one person say "I believe in you," it's a game changer, right? I didn't really understand the go outside and walk around the block part, but he's giving me so much good stuff, I might as well take that one with me. So I did. I just, because when I was going through tough times, I closed every blind in my house. I kept it as dark as I possibly could, because that felt good. That felt safe, right? Nobody can get in. I got alarms and cameras on my house. I can see when people are coming. So I keep my world at that time very dark and very safe. And then as I'm talking to Jim, I realized you're doing the exact opposite of what you probably should be doing, right? So when he said, go outside and just walk around the block, I thought, I don't really want to, but I'm gonna take a flyer here, and I did. And by the time I got home, I was like, you gotta open those blinds, right? You gotta call somebody. I don't care who you call somebody and just talk. And don't talk about your problems. Just talk about something else. So I called a couple of my buddies and we talked about golf. That's always safe with me. And I just started to think about what Jim had told me and especially when he started talking about my kids, man, that was probably the hardest part is thinking about life without my kids without me, like my kids having life without me being there. I was just talking to my son today. He's asking me, he's in town, I didn't know, and he was gonna stop by the house. And I said, I'm on my way to do an interview. I'll come and see you when I get back in town. And so those little things like that, man, my son not being able to call me, right? And now as I think about it, I think, man, I was one day away from my kids not having me, and I reflect on that daily now.
You wrote them a letter. What did that letter say?
I'll give you a little bit, but not too much. The reality is my biggest part in that letter was I apologize for failing them. I apologize for bad decisions, and I asked for their forgiveness. But the most part is I asked them to celebrate the times we had together. Those are a few pieces of it. And I put it in a place where they would find it if I wasn't around, right? And that was probably, as I was doing that, in my mind, I'm like, what are you doing? No matter what you've been through, these two kids deserve better. And combining what Jim was telling me and talking to a therapist and then really sitting and reflecting on that piece right there, you start to really slowly start to have a shift of mind and start to think, can I pull myself out of this? And I started to say yes, right? Before it was no. no, I can't. But then you slowly start to say, I think I can. You've pulled yourself out of worse, you know? You've seen every bit of violence in your life. You've come from a broken family, you know? You've seen chaos at its worst. You can handle this. Then you start to lean on other people. In the city where I'm from, in the upbringing I came from, you don't lean on people. You don't ask for help. Help is a sign of weakness. So as you're going through this crisis, you have to reprogram your mind. And there's a lot of people where I'm from and from the inner city, they've been programmed the same way I was. You don't ask for help, you don't show emotion, you suppress it, and you just keep moving forward. Not realizing the damage you're doing to yourself, right? It became easier for me as I talked and got stuff out as opposed to holding it in.
Which is hard to do when you've been programmed and wired differently.
Yeah.
You've alluded to your children were one day away
Yeah.
from being just like you, without a father.
Yeah.
I mean, you had a date, you had a plan.
Yep.
Was it the phone call that saved your life? Was that phone call the day before, the day of?
I think Jim knew. I'll be honest with you. I didn't know Jim was in Scotland. I didn't know where Jim was. I'll be honest with you, I didn't care. Because I knew if I didn't get to talk to Jim, because Jim was my confidant. I mean, it grew past that conversation in his office. I knew if I didn't, because I talked to my therapist, but if I didn't get to talk to him, I thought, this ain't gonna end well. So was it the phone call that gave me that changed my mind and changed the course of my life? 100%. I think Jim could tell from the tone of my voice, I was in crisis. And it ain't been too many times in my life where I've been in crisis. I was in crisis and I didn't know how to handle it. But I knew he'd been through tough stuff too. And if there's anybody I could rely on to just potentially give me something to help me not go that way, but go that way, I thought, I'm gonna call Jim. And I felt terrible because I took him away from his time with his lovely wife on vacation, but at the same time, I didn't care, I was selfish. You know, and what I loved about Jim is he didn't make me feel rushed. He didn't make me feel like he had to get off the phone. He took the time to talk to me. And by the time I got off the phone, I was like, man, it's nice to have somebody believe in you. And that was my mind as I hung up the phone. It's nice to feel like somebody believes in you when everybody else is against you.
I want you guys, you can both answer this, but there's a lot of people at home, maybe watching this, who will or are in your position. You know, they're fighting silently.
Yeah.
They're struggling silently. They don't have the courage or the strength or the want to reach out to somebody. And Jim, there's a lot of people at home who are in a position to notice and to start those conversations and to listen. Will, what advice can you give to those people who are silently struggling? And Jim, what advice can you give to those who can make a difference?
My advice to them is if I can survive, you can too. But you have to take the first step, right? You got to decide that I'm going to reach out to someone, I'm going to open up, and I'm going to share. I'm going to be willing to share, and I'm going to share as much as I possibly can so that the person who hears me, they can help me build a plan to survive. Don't stay silent. Be willing to reprogram yourself. Don't think that just because you learned it as a kid that that's the way it is now. I had to check my pride at the door, right? And beyond me, I had to look at, if I make a bad decision, who else does it impact besides me, right? And as I started to put all this together, I started to say to myself, okay, you can do this. It's gonna be hard, and you're gonna have to climb this mountain really, really slow, but you can do it. So I would tell anybody who's struggling, don't be silent. Don't stay silent. That'd be the first thing. Think your thoughts through very carefully of why you are in the position you are, and then start to share that with someone who you think can help you progress from where you are to where you want to be. and be open to something new. Because in my case, new was scary, right? Because new would take me so far out of my comfort zone. New would make me vulnerable. And when you grow up where I grew up, being vulnerable is not an option. So I would ask anybody who's struggling, don't be silent.
Yeah, for me, it's reaching out and engaging. The first step to be nice is notice. You got to look for it. You got to talk to your kids. I mean, really talk to them. You got to look for signs. There are signs, and if anybody doesn't really feel they know what signs to look for, there's lots of places to get that. Certainly, Mental Health Foundation and the Be Nice program, but you can do internet research, I'm sure, and find certain signs. And I learned those signs with my child. I had a radar for it. I could pick it up, and I was always engaging in conversations. And actually, that's the same with Will. Touching base a lot, just talking, just listening, but putting myself out there, even if it felt a little uncomfortable, a little bit scary, but putting myself out there to connect, to just listen and be supportive and try to help. I think that's like the main thing, because once you get somebody, I mean, the difference between where Will was and him pulling himself out of it was somebody there he could engage with and just be supportive and talk to.
That's right.
That was it. And that's what our role is as parents. That's what our role is as coworkers or friends, as family members. Make yourself available, look for it, notice, and stay connected. That's what it's all about.
How proud was your family member when you told them, hey, I got this guy, and I think I helped save him?
I didn't say that because, truthfully, I didn't know that. I knew Will was in a really dark place when we had that phone call. Excuse me. But I didn't realize how bad it was. I think it was 2 years after that, and it's kind of hard for me to talk about, but I think 2 years after that, in one of our conversations, Will told me, you saved my life. And that floored me. I never expected to hear that in my life from anybody. And it shook me. And it's still, I hold it close to my heart. It's one of the most amazing things that anybody's ever said to me. And yeah, my family, my kids are proud of me. I think that, one message I'd have to people too, like parents and stuff, is that experience for me reminds me of two things. One is it reminds me of what I believe is the incredible capacity that each one of us has to help others, to make a difference with other people. I think it's born in all of us, and a lot of us don't realize it, don't think about it, but we've all got incredible capacity to make a difference. And the second thing that I learned from that is, and I'd recommend for people, is never underestimate the potential of any interaction you have with somebody, because you never know where exactly they're at. You never know how your interaction with them might impact them. And I just think that's a great way to think. I try to think about that all the time. And, I think that when people are attuned to that and are connected and are willing to notice and know how to notice, it can help people in need with mental health issues.
And Will, lastly, it's not over. Those are words that Jim told you 4 years ago. This is a daily battle. How do you combat that now? How do you look at the future? And what's your advice to somebody who's in the thick of it, ready to fight in the long haul?
Wow. Build a plan. That's the one thing I do in my life now is For anything I'm trying to accomplish, I build a plan. What am I trying to accomplish? How am I going to get there, and what does success look like? It's that simple, you know. And because when you're trying to fight a fight and you don't have a plan, most likely you're going to lose that fight, right? So for me, I take my time. You know, Jim said it. You know, he listened to me, and that was one thing I felt like nobody else was doing. Everybody had an opinion, but nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. So I sit down with my kids daily, and we talk about what's your plan, right? My daughter struggles a little bit with some issues, so I talk to her more than I talk to my son, right? Because I know she needs a little bit more of more attention, and I'm using a lot of the stuff that I went through and a lot of the skills that I've learned, have been taught, to make sure my daughter's in a good place. So I tell anybody who's struggling, the first thing to do, like you said, be willing to engage and reach out. Be willing to find someone who will listen to you and build a plan with them, right? It doesn't have to be some elaborate plan. It could be the smallest thing, but it can have the biggest impact, right? Just start with, what are you trying to accomplish? How am I going to get there? And if I'm successful, what does that look like? It's the ultimate plan.
You can start with something as simple as a conversation and the words, "I believe in you," and ultimately leading to, "You saved my life."
Yeah.
Right.
Jim Ayers, Will Collins, thank you so much for being a part of this Cascade Community Foundation question and answer session and sharing and impacting others and making a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Proud of you,
Appreciate
buddy.
it. Appreciate you, buddy.
A powerful message and a great job by Casey. What you just saw was an act of bravery on the part of Will Collins and, of course, Jim Ayers as well. And it's a compelling message, but it's often also very untold. And in the weeks that have come since that was aired to now, I can share with you that Will has joined the board of the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan, and Jim Ayers, who's on the board, was a welcoming participant to invite him to that. I'm joined now by Christy Buck, who's the executive director of the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan. Christy, that was rare to hear a story like that.
Yeah, you know, Justin, when you first reached out to do this project and you specifically asked me for if I had anybody in my bank of speakers who is a survivor of an attempt or who had suicidal ideation, and it's often difficult to find someone that's willing to share that journey because it can be painful. And so I've known Will, I met Will. The first time I ever met Will was at a golf outing, and he was golfing with Jim, and Will actually shared with me, you see that guy over there? He saved my life. And it stuck with me. So when I was in my bank of ideas, I said, I'm gonna call Jim. And Jim just couldn't, you know, he said, you remember that? I'm like, yeah, it stuck with me for two and a half years, Jim. So then he made the call to Will, and then it turned into, you think Will would want to be on the board before even the interview. Yeah. And so things blossom really well, you know.
Well, certainly not frequent enough. And I think a lot of times with video series like this, you're left with a cliffhanger. You get this compelling emotional representation of perhaps what viewers right now are experiencing, but then you're just left to your own devices to go and find the resources. That's not what we're after here today. Cascade Community Foundation is bringing the Q&A live stream forward for the primary reason of providing resources. So having the Mental Health Foundation with us on this journey has been fantastic. And I think, you know, what's important for people to understand about the story that's going on between Will and Jim is exactly what you're trying to bring out through Be Nice. So why don't you share a little bit for our viewers that don't know what the Mental Health Foundation is and what this Be Nice action plan is so that they get an idea as we go into the questions.
Yeah. Well, again, I appreciate the partnership collaboration with the Cascade Community Foundation. For those who are members of the foundation and supporters, this is a very worthwhile project. So the Mental Health Foundation, created back in 1990, surrounding, our main mission was surrounding stigma, increasing awareness surrounding mental health disorders. acceptance and respect, dignity. And then as we moved on, about in 2005, I was asked to do a presentation at Forest Hills Eastern High School in our community, and it was surrounding mental health, stigma related to mental health disorders. And the teacher, and she's still there right now, she said, "Can you come back next week?" And so I said, "Of course." She said, "Your information is so compelling." So I went back, created an 8-lesson curriculum, and went into Forest Hills Eastern High School into the sociology and Spanish classes, believe it or not. That's what she taught. And from there, it blossomed into an amazing program, and it's still in existence. But then 10 years ago to the day, actually, last week, there was an incident that happened at Rutgers University, and a young man took his life. And the incident that happened that brought him to that point was being harassed, bullied on the cybernet by his college roommate, national attention. And with that, we created a response to add on to our programs that we were already in schools. And that was be nice. Understand that how you treat an individual has an effect on how they think, act, feel. 9 months later, and this is, Justin, where I'm really super excited about the work that we do, we created an action plan. So the action plan is to notice, invite, challenge, and empower. And I'm going to reflect back on our story and show examples of how the action plan was utilized.
Yeah, and that's where we're going with this too, because one of the immediate things that viewers understand after Casey walks with Will a little bit about his backstory and a little bit what he was going through, in enters Jim, and he noticed, right? And it was more than just noticing, but he set up a circumstance in which he noticed. I would love to get your feedback and what your take was as they were talking about how Jim kind of created this environment.
You got it. Okay, one, there's a macro of be nice. And the macro is to have an understanding that I need to notice the good, the right about people. I need to invite myself into conversations. I need to invite myself to have an open door policy. I need to challenge myself to do that, and I need to have a greater understanding as to why that is so important. And then that ultimately empowers people around me, okay? So now fast forward. That was Jim. He was a nicer. He was the person that had that open door policy for a reason. And then you have a gentleman that's looking for help on this day, right? At work, going, wow, I watched that guy speak. I can trust him. And he felt that comfortable to enter into Jim's office to start a conversation. And so the notice piece is part of Jim's whole philosophy. And as we speak to many people here today that are watching this, I want y'all to remember, are you a noticer? Are you that person that somebody could come and feel comfortable?
And what are they looking for? Jim had experienced some things himself with his family, so he knew some of the cues. He had, you had met, I'm assuming by then, and had started to understand some of the Be Nice curriculum. But for viewers at home or those that are watching, what are some of the things that you want to be on the lookout for?
Yep, well, to notice, you want to be looking for the signs and symptoms of a change in someone's behavior. And so that's why with Be Nice, it's that macro level of noticing the good, the right, so I can notice the difference. So I know all of these great things about this person, but suddenly I go to work and this person is feeling, thinking, and acting differently. Now, in Will's situation, he himself was feeling different. And he felt the need to go talk to someone and felt that, and he says it, I'm not just saying what he felt, he expresses it, that he got that feeling right away from Jim when he saw him speaking. His office is around the corner. I mean, Jim is not Will's direct supervisor, and we did find that out, right? But there was something about Jim's personality. And you scope out folks and see, he's a good listener. And how do you know when somebody's a good listener? And Jim kept pointing that out, right, in our video. You gotta listen, man. You gotta be there. You gotta talk back to the person, let them know what you're hearing from them.
Yeah.
So when Will went there, Will knew that he was struggling and he needed to find resources. And I loved when Jim challenged Will to seek out counseling and therapy. And that was absolutely essential. And that's what happens with the action plan. When you get to the C, You are challenging resources, but I'm going to have those resources in my back pocket. Where can someone go get help and assistance?
Yeah, so notice is the N. And notice is a two-way street. It's noticing behavior changes in someone you know, a loved one, a colleague in this case. It's also noticing changes in behavior in yourself.
Yeah.
That's got to be difficult because you're dealing with things yourself and then you start to notice things. It's not something you're audibly letting know. It's something that's happening in here. So now you've got this additional area where conflict is already happening. For those that are maybe watching that are noticing, they saw our flyer or got a Facebook link from us and knew about you guys and are on because they're noticing right now. How do they walk into that next step? Where does the N become an I?
Well, and I love the plan because it's kind of simple. So you start with the person that you might be talking to, or you in yourself. You're inviting yourself to look and see what you're noticing. So you can start the sentence off with, "Hey, Justin, you're not yourself lately. You've been late to work. You've been coming in not prepared at your desk. And at meetings, you're not turning your camera on." I mean, whatever it is that you are noticing that is different, you start it with, what are you noticing? And I also love to go back to what I've noticed is good and right about the person. And then that gives me that basic message to that person that I've cared and I'm concerned enough with you that I've noticed all these good and right things about you for me to now be able to say, this is what I'm noticing now.
Yeah.
And it could be, something's changed at home. It could be some things that are going on in your life. It could be a new project that you're working on. It could be a new move. It could be that, you're going to be an empty nester. I mean, there's so many things that can happen that can open up a conversation by just saying those two words.
Sure. So
I've noticed.
So the open dialogue, the communication, particularly in a professional setting, very important. And I think Jim and Will kind of demonstrated that really well. And now we get to invite. And Jim talks about this a little bit, that he invited in Will because they alluded to some conversations had. They didn't get into detail about some of those pre-conversations before 2017 in that spring, but some conversations were had that obviously Jim had been inviting Will in to learn about him growing, the way he grew up. He knew some intimate details about Will. In your world, what's the invite looking like? What are some of the examples and success stories about an invite that is the right way to do it?
It's one of the best steps, and that's where you are going to be the listener. And Jim repeated that. He said, you got to be the listener, and you're letting that person just tell you what's going on. There's not going to be any judgment. And it's typical listening skills that a lot of us have gone to conferences about, to how do you be a good listener? Well, now you take those skills and you really hone in on them. You're making contact, eye contact with that person. You're nodding your head like you're understanding what they're talking about, even though you might not. And if you don't, you can even repeat something back to that person because you're letting them know that I am listening.
Yeah.
You put away all electronic devices. You might have to shut the door. You might have to sit down and have eye contact with that person.
Yeah.
But that invite step is absolutely huge. And what you're building is trust and belief that you are going to help me. Because at that point, when somebody is at their utmost struggling, and those even were those conversations before 17 for Will and Jim, it was that whole opening the door that, man, this guy, I can trust him. He has no judgment. He doesn't look at my past history about anything but who I am as a person right now. It's incredible.
And is there a two-way street on the invite as well? So this to me is the step that I know I would struggle with the most. Not necessarily inviting someone in as I've noticed a change, but if I myself am going through something, is there an invite angle to that? Do I need to invite someone in and take down my barriers and be willing to be revealing? Is that part of the Be Nice acronym, that side of the invite as well?
So the invite itself, yes. You mean to the point where somebody is self-aware about themselves?
Exactly.
Oh,
now
big
they have to
time.
invite somebody else in. So then now the invites happen both ways.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And for Will, he jumped to that step when he went into Jim's office the first time to talk to him about what was going on, right?
Yep.
And he was looking for help. He wasn't sure what he needed help with. But in that conversation, the first one that they had, Jim, he's not a clinician, he's not a therapist, he said it, right? He's not. But what he did was he asked more questions. And also he was able to give Will the sense that, man, you are not alone in this. And then gave him resources. So way back then, Will was discovering things about himself that he's coming to find that, man, I never dealt with all this stuff when I was a kid. I never quite understood what was going on. That was just my childhood. Yeah. And now here I am as an adult having this bigger understanding of all this gobbledygook, this major stuff, man, from when he was a kid is now catching up with me as an adult. That's huge.
Yeah.
And self-awareness, Justin, is not easy at all. And that is something you learn by getting good treatment, by getting help and assistance, by being able to recognize these things. So a stat I just want to throw out is 50% of mental health disorders start at the age of 14 years old and 75% by the age of 24 years old. So imagine how many folks, like a Will, a lot, who have gone untreated because those things were just dismissed. And some of the risk factors for depression, for any mental health disorder, are traumatic events as a child. And so, traumatic events, right, can be growing up in a single parent household, having a parent that's not there a lot, being an observant of traumatic events in your life where maybe a sibling or a parent were hurt, maimed, killed, growing up in an environment where there was no food on the table. I mean, these are big things, a death of a parent at a young age. And we have to take into account that those things, right, if they are not looked at, confronted in that childhood time, that as an adult, it can come back to be part of who you are as an adult and where you might possibly struggle with depression, anxiety.
This is to me where the non-discriminatory factor comes into mental illness, to any of the disorders, is that for those that are watching from Ada or Cascade in the suburbs or from anywhere, who have access to means, grew up, with money, versus somebody like Will, who did not grow up with money, who was exposed to a lot of difficult challenges from a socioeconomic standpoint, but also obviously with what he was dealing with in the neighborhood around him and gangs and things like this that he shared with us. And the interesting thing is that you can't really rank a traumatic experience, because what might be traumatic for a 14-year-old child in Forest Hills High School may be different than what happened to Will when he was in high school. But the way it sets in, it's still very traumatic, and there's no way, that's how it's going to get at you. So I think it's important for the viewers to understand that Will's story is unique because he triumphed over unsurmountable odds that many do not get into. But then when he finds this success and comes and is enrolled at Grand Valley and finds a nice job and is working for Amway and raising his kids in Ada, there's still something going on underneath. And I think that right there is the uniqueness, that we can see a neighborhood filled with people and we don't know what's going on behind closed doors because there's this ability to put up a barrier.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about what are you seeing in terms of what might be happening in the inner cities of Detroit and those traumatic experiences versus what might be happening in the suburbs and people that might be watching now.
Sure. And a lot, there's so much that goes into our assumptions about people that may be living in suburbs. Okay, we all have all these assumptions. Mm-hmm. So you can't assume that that family members aren't struggling, that there are arguments going on, that there's substance use disorder, that there's possible divorces, there's single parent households, and even though there might be two parents in the house, maybe they're totally separated within the house. You honestly do not know. So traumatic experiences aren't always the ones that are on TV that are showing us violence and disruption in neighborhoods. It can be what's going on the inside, and it's very It's very hard to realize that those experiences can have a dramatic effect on how kids are at home, but also how they will be as an adult.
Yeah.
So this is why our programming is essential. Justin, I'll put that plug in, for K through 12th grade. We start at a very young age with our programming, and that is the action plan: notice, invite, challenge, and empower, meant for elementary, of noticing the good, the right, so I can notice the difference in how someone is thinking, acting, and feeling. It's amazing when you talk about mental health to kindergartners, because by the time they're 14, are they recognizing within themselves, like, I'm not thinking, acting, and feeling right? Or is it my best friend who I've always grown up with, and all of a sudden I haven't seen him all summer because we're at our camps out in Massachusetts, in the South, wherever, and suddenly they come back and they don't want to hang out with me anymore? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's where now you implement the plan again, and then what happens? The plan is for professionals, the plan is for faith communities, the plan is for older adults. I could rattle off statistics to you right now and your head would be spinning, but I won't go there.
Yeah. So the next is challenge. And so in the story with Will and Jim, that first meeting, it seems as though Jim knew what he was doing. Jim was pushing towards a challenge of some kind, because he said to him, you know, I want to see you get some of this help, and teed that up. Talk about both sides of this, because the challenge has got to be, for someone like Will, who seemed very comfortable with Jim, enough so that he was going to take his advice, but that's not always going to be the case. You might get the opportunity where you talk to someone and you get a challenge in, but you don't know if they're going to act on that challenge and move forward. So talk a little bit about what Will and Jim experienced there, but what are some other scenarios?
So one, I can go back years, and that was where Will was dealing with the stigma, all right, of what was going on in his life. Remember, he was talking about, man, it was like, you're not supposed to feel this way. You can't feel emotions. You got to suck it up. You got to put your back on. You got to put your big boy pants on, right?
Yep.
And deal with this stuff. All right, so that's one part of challenge, is challenging the stigma. So Jim may have been facing somebody that he may have across his desk who he's chatting with, who's going to say, no, that's not me. I don't need any help. Those are for crazy people. So you are challenging the stigma at that point. And it's like this: hey, you are not alone. And it may be that you're sharing a story about something that's gone on in your own life, your own experience, or it may be that, listen, this is good stuff to be able to talk to people. I'm here for you, and you know I'm going to be here for you. But there's also professional people out there that really can take care of this. And at that point, you got to be ready with your resources. I don't like to just say, here, call this number. I mean, yes, the hotline for suicide prevention, I'm going to have that. But if it's a clinician, if there are business people listening today, I'm going to push employee assistance programs are one of the best resources to be able to have for your employees, for them to get that 6 weeks of a shot in the arm, of good treatment and good therapy. And from there, you're introduced to something that can be the biggest barrier, and that is treatment. So that's that challenge part.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing this right, somebody who understands the curriculum, knows what they're doing a little bit, whether it's a professional setting or a personal setting, they get to that challenge stage, but that might be the first area where you really are going to run into a wall. What are some tools that they may need? If they get resistance, do you push through? Is that the plan?
Yeah.
Or do you slowly start to put blocks in place and you're going to take some time to overcome this wall? What's a plan of action?
Well, part of it is that conversation again. I like the plan because it's never linear. I got to pop back.
Right.
Maybe it's going to be to go back and listen again. Maybe it's going to be, what is your hesitance? What is your hesitance? Because you know what? I care about you, man, and it's hard for me to see you like this. You don't pop to, if you keep doing this, you're going to lose your job. No, these are conversations. It's like, it could help. It could help. Now, you also could say, look, I'm going to be the person that's going to be here for you. I'm going to be watching, because I do believe that there is help out there for you right now, and you don't have to feel this way, right?
Yep.
Because that might be that next conversation, get this, where somebody is contemplating to take their life. I'm the call that the person is making.
Great example,
Right?
I mean, that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened. In the story with Will actually calls a therapist that Jim had steered him towards. The therapist calls Jim, who's on business but is taking a day, and here's Jim getting this call, and it's the one person that Will can talk to. That's Will demonstrated his ability and willingness to talk to in that moment, and this is where the life-saving thing comes into play. And thankfully, Jim has some experience with this. He knows how to walk this a little bit, and he admits he's terrified. He's not sure, but he just checks on his gut and he checks on his instincts to just do what he thinks is right. For those that are experiencing a mental health episode, so you're watching this Q&A live stream right now because you've got a tendency to fall into depression, loneliness, anxiety, things like that, and you're coming up, you're making this phone call to somebody, right? And this is part of this kind of empowerment. Is this part of getting into empowerment here? So now they feel empowered from this person that they've selected?
Oh yeah. So if I flip around here with Will's story also, the fact that he was seeing a clinician was simply amazing. So at the clinician's office, and I'm not going to say what exactly happened, but this is what we instruct, is when I'm doing the plan, and I might be this lay person, a question that I might ask is, especially if somebody is contemplating to take their life, have you ever felt this way before? Okay, yeah, I felt this way. What has helped you in the past? Is there anyone that has ever helped you in the past? So in this situation, in Will's therapy session, in this conversation, Will identified this person that has helped him in the past. Would you want to talk to that person right now? I mean, that's like key.
Yeah.
You got money in the bank right there that there's someone. So that phone call happened, right, from the clinician's office.
Yeah.
So then Jim can't be there right away. In that situation, if it was something where I'm right there, it may be, hey, I'm on my way over. Let's keep talking on the phone while I get in my car. I'm there for you. Jim was overseas.
Yeah.
So Jim did anything he could, and the best thing was to keep him on the phone, keep him conversing, and I really got the chills when I watched the piece. And Justin, Jim gave Will hope. Hope.
Yeah.
And how did he do that? He talked about his family. He didn't talk about what are your kids going to do without you? What are your kids going to feel like? No accusations, no nothing. Other than, hey, remember, we grew up in these houses without dads, man. We're dads.
Yeah.
Your kids are you. And that whole conversation was not instilling guilt. It was looking down that way of giving him hope.
Yeah. And he mentions it's the first time he found that.
Yes.
And it didn't just start there. It was planted when Jim's up on stage giving his speech to a sea of employees that are under his care from a professional standpoint, and him believing him then, and the hope had been seeded. Yeah. Go a little bit more into the empowerment, because I want to make sure viewers at home understand if they themselves are experiencing something, what that empowerment starts to feel like. But then also if you know someone, how do you get to them to that empowerment stage? Because that's where the support and the help comes in, turning from relying on this individual that you're entrusting in to actually getting the help that you need.
Right. So there's always two sides. Okay. So with Be Nice, that empowerment piece is if I'm helping somebody in a crisis situation, which Jim was helping Will in a crisis situation, Jim knew, okay, he's with his clinician. I'm going to encourage him to do what I would do, and those were giving him hope. Like, get out, walk out of your front door, and get some fresh air. Pull those blinds up. Let yourself see the light. And in a way, seeing the light also is seeing things in front of you, right? That tunnel vision that somebody can get into. Then the empowerment piece also is this piece of protective factors. And those are those things that I can instill in my life to help myself with my mental health. Basic ones are exercise, eating right, making sure that I'm engaging in satisfying relationships with people. There's so many good things that I can do for my own mental health. Everybody can try this right now, especially during the past year of COVID, right? Then there's the other side, and this is where I might be struggling with a mental health disorder. Those go-to empowerment protective factors are having access to services, utilizing services, right?
Yeah.
Having supportive family, friends, huge. Having hobbies, being involved in things. These are things that I can now instill in my life to help me in these situations where I'm not feeling great. Okay, I've got these go-to people. I can pick up the phone, and maybe it's been 8 years since I've seen my clinician, but you know what? I'm not feeling well again. And that is the biggest piece, Justin, is self-awareness. Knowing when I'm not feeling good. Knowing when I'm stressed out. Knowing when these things are having an effect on my mental health. Thinking, acting, feeling.
And it strikes me right now that you don't need to have all of those things perfectly in order to successfully get out of this episode that you might just need one.
Yeah.
If you can cling to one. In Will's case, he put in the phone call, he did what he needed to do. In previous cases, and Will alludes to this, he called your hotline anonymously. He got an opportunity to phone in, and as he says, he didn't want anybody to judge him, so he didn't want to share who it was. That's incredibly powerful to me, that you have this opportunity and the person on the other side isn't going to say, well, let me get your name, let me get your phone number, what's your address, but it was just simply to talk them, to many degrees off the ledge, so to speak.
So there is a hotline, and again, going into that crisis situation, if I am going forward and moving through this action plan, and this is what we do a lot of training, that's our business. We have mental health education, suicide prevention programs that we train people in how to implement the action plan. I've got to be willing to put that phone number into my phone, 1-800-273-8255, or text help to 741-741. Those are those tools that I'm going to have at my disposal to give to this person that I might be concerned that they are thinking about taking their life. And that possibly also may be, Justin, on asking them a question. I'm so concerned about you right now, I'm going to ask you, are you thinking about taking your life? And so in the conversation that Jim was having, he knew that Will was to that point. I mean, he felt that on the phone. He got that out of the whole conversation. Yeah. He knew that Will was with a clinician, though. You got to remember, right?
Yep.
Later on, right? Fast forward, Jim finds out that he actually, truly, literally saved his life that day. That Will actually had a plan and a time when he was going to take his life. He had written a suicide note. So we never know that unless we're willing to ask questions. If I have this gut feeling that, holy cow, man, this is heavy duty, I got to be willing to ask the question, provide resources, and that number one resource right then can be the hotline. All right, it is.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm not just going to give it, here, call the hotline. No, let's call together.
Yeah.
And also, I might say, do you want to text the hotline or do you want to call the hotline?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Or do you want to call the hotline or would you rather speak to somebody locally? Like, let's get Forest View or Pine Rest on the horn and tell them what's going on. And with that, Justin, how I just said that, I'm not, this is a yes, not yes or no. This is, what do you want to do? You want to do this or you want to do this? It's so cool.
Yeah.
And the clinician, again, could have given Will that questioning in the office. You want to call this guy or do you want me to call the hospital? I mean, there's a lot that happens, right?
Yeah. And those are the resources that are out there. No matter what walk of life, there's resources available to you. Christy, thank you so much for being a part of this. We appreciate not just your expertise, but your ability to look back into what these viewers have been experiencing with Will and, of course, with Jim's story as well. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So that's not the last you're going to see from Christy Buck. She's going to be along for the ride for a 5-episode run. This is just episode 1, coming up next Wednesday at 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel, Cascade Community Foundation. You will find episode 2, or part 2 of Isolated, and we'll be featuring Kim Bodie, a local businesswoman, and she'll be talking with Valerie Lego as well. We'll be right back.
The next time you're on a Zoom call with 5 people or more, keep in mind that one of those individuals will likely experience a mental health episode this year.
In our community, happening right now, 1 in 5 people suffer from some form of mental illness. So we're taking action across Kent County to ensure resources are being provided to those who need it most.
Depression, anxiety, loneliness, and thoughts of suicide aren't determined by where you live or how successful you are. So this is a county-wide effort. And when it comes to your mental health, your spouses, your parents, your children, now is not the time to wait. Now is the time to act.
If you or someone you know are experiencing a change in mental behavior, please use the resources provided at the bottom of the screen. Act. You'll be happy you did.
Welcome back, and we thank you for our local leaders for being a part of this as well. Very, very powerful stuff. So thank you to Casey Jones for being a wonderful professional and leading the way as a special guest moderator for this part 1 of Isolated. And of course, to our sponsors and underwriters of this episode, we want to direct people right now. You can make donations to the Mental Health Foundation of West Michigan, to Cascade Community Foundation. For us, if you want to go to sponsor at cascadecommunityfoundation.com and send us an email. You can also go to our website, Cascade Community Foundation, as well. Also, to those that might be experiencing a mental health episode, who understand what the conversation was just about, whether it's within themselves or somebody that they know, and you're looking to talk to somebody, there's a phone number on the screen right now that you can go to. There's also plenty of resources that'll be coming up in the credits following this episode. So make sure you're connecting directly with those resources. Contact Be Nice if there's anything that you need, and of course contact us as well if there's anything that we can do for you. We want to thank all of those that joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you back here next Wednesday at 8 p.m., March 17th, for Isolated Part 2. Thanks for being with us.